Subscribe for the full story.
My cousin stole my winning lottery ticket. He didn't know I had already signed the back of it. The sheer audacity of it hit me first. Not the loss of the money, but the violation of trust, as my cousin clutched the ticket like a stolen jewel. A giddy, almost manic gleam was in his eyes, a stark contrast to the usual sullen discontent that clung to him like a second skin. He was already envisioning a life of ease, a life he hadn't earned, built on a foundation of my carefully chosen numbers and a moment of uncharacteristic impulse to buy a ticket for a local draw. I watched him, frozen for a beat, the celebratory cheers from the small gathering around us fading into a dull roar in my ears. His triumphant grin was the final sickening confirmation. He hadn't just borrowed it or held on to it for safekeeping, as he might later try to spin it. He had taken it. Subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories of betrayal and triumph. The air in my kitchen, moments before filled with the mundane hum of pre-dinner preparations and the excited chatter of family members, now felt charged with a thick, suffocating silence. The celebratory cheers had indeed died down, replaced by the sudden, jarring realization that the golden ticket, the object of much speculation and good-natured ribbing, was no longer in my possession. And the culprit stood before me, beaming with an entitlement that curdled in my stomach. My cousin, Darren, a man whose life had been a series of near misses and perpetual disappointment, was radiating a triumphant glow I'd never witnessed. He was thin, wiry, with perpetually nervous hands and a habit of chewing the inside of his cheek. Today, however, his usual fidgeting was replaced by a swagger. He held the ticket aloft, a flimsy piece of paper that suddenly represented a seismic shift in his fortunes and, by extension, a devastating blow to my own. "Can you believe it, Aunt Carol?" he'd exclaimed, his voice raspy with disbelief and excitement, addressing my mother, who was now staring at Darren with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "This is it! My ticket out!" My mother, always the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth over every family rift, sputtered, "Darren, what are you talking about? That's your ticket? I thought it was a joke." Darren's grin widened, a predatory flash of teeth. "Joke? Aunt Carol, this is no joke. This is the real deal. I'm rich." He then turned his triumphant gaze on me. "You hear that, Sarah? I'm rich." The words landed like stones, each one chipping away at the fragile edifice of familial affection I'd carefully constructed over the years. I saw my own disbelief mirrored in the faces of the other family members gathered. My younger sister Emily, who had been enthusiastically discussing how we'd all celebrate, looked utterly stunned. My father, a quiet man who rarely showed emotion, had a frown etched deep into his brow. It was then, as Darren continued to gloat, oblivious to the growing tension, that a flicker of something, not quite hope, but a sharp, invigorating clarity, pierced through my shock. I remembered the impulsive act, a moment of paranoia perhaps, or just a simple desire to ensure ownership. I had signed the back of the ticket. My name, Sarah Davies. A simple, elegant signature that, in that instant, felt like a shield. My mind, usually prone to panic in stressful situations, clicked into a different gear. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about justice. It was about stopping this blatant act of theft, this perversion of family. "Darren," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, cutting through his triumphant monologue. Everyone turned to look at me. My throat felt tight, but I forced myself to continue. "That ticket is mine." Darren's laughter was a harsh, grating sound. "Yours? Don't be ridiculous, Sarah. You're just jealous because I'm the one who's going to be living the high life now." He waved the ticket dismissively. "You're the one who was so busy with your fancy job, you probably barely even glanced at the numbers." "Actually," I replied, my gaze locking with his, a silent challenge passing between us, "I chose them. Every single one." A flicker of something, unease, crossed Darren's face, but he quickly masked it. Yeah, well, you still gave it to me. I didn't give it to you, Darren, I corrected, my voice rising slightly. I bought it. I was going to hold on to it until I checked the numbers. My mother stepped forward, her hands on her hips. Darren, Sarah's right. She bought the ticket. She was going to check it. Darren scoffed, a sound of pure derision. Oh, please. She's just saying that because she's mad I won. You all saw me pick it up. It was on the counter. This was the crux of it. The ticket had indeed been on the kitchen counter, amongst a scattering of mail and flyers, after I'd paid for my groceries. Darren had been visiting, ostensibly to borrow some money for a vague business venture, and had, in his opportunistic way, spotted the ticket. He must have seen it as a lucky find, a way to bypass his usual struggle. You didn't pick it up, Darren, I said, my voice now laced with a cold, hard edge. You took it, and you know what? It doesn't matter anyway. Darren's triumphant smirk faltered. What do you mean? I mean, I said, reaching into my purse, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear but from the building surge of adrenaline, that I signed the back of it. I pulled out my own wallet, my fingers fumbling for a moment before I extracted a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was the receipt from the corner store, dated that afternoon, and tucked behind it, I produced another piece of paper, a photocopy, a crisp, clear photocopy of the winning lottery ticket. Darren stared at it, his eyes narrowing. He looked from my photocopy to the original ticket clutched in his hand, then back again. Confusion warred with suspicion on his face. What is that? He demanded, his voice losing its earlier bravado. That, I said, holding up the photocopy, is proof. Proof that I bought the ticket. Proof that it's mine. And the original? The one you're holding? It has my signature on the back. My name, Sarah Davies. The color drained from Darren's face. His jaw hung open, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening realization. He instinctively brought the ticket closer to his face, his nervous fingers fumbling to turn it over. My mother gasped. Emily let out a small, triumphant squeal. My father's frown softened, replaced by a look of grim satisfaction. Darren stared at the back of the ticket, his eyes scanning the bold, black ink of my signature. The gleam of triumph had vanished, replaced by a pale, desperate fear. He stammered, But you can't. I can, and I did, I said, my voice firm. The Lottery Commission has clear rules about ownership. A signed ticket is proof of who it belongs to. Even if you somehow managed to get it cashed, and I doubt you'd get very far with it, the money would ultimately be awarded to me. The silence that followed was profound. Darren looked like he'd been punched in the gut. The ticket, once a symbol of his imagined escape, now felt like a burning brand in his hand. He looked from me to the ticket, his mind clearly racing through 1,000 desperate scenarios, none of which involved him actually benefiting from this. You photocopied it? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Yes, I confirmed. And I have the original receipt, too. You just happened to be here when I was sorting through my purse, and you saw an opportunity, didn't you? He didn't answer. He just stood there, the weight of his deceit crashing down on him. The imagined life of ease evaporated, replaced by the stark reality of his actions. He had stolen from his own family, and in his haste, he had been outmaneuvered by the very person he had wronged. My mother, recovering from her initial shock, stepped towards him. Darren, how could you? Sarah is your cousin. We are your family. Her voice was laced with disappointment, a far more potent weapon than anger. Darren finally dropped the ticket. It fluttered to the floor, landing amongst the scattered newspapers and flyers. He looked at it, then at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and resentment. You always had to be so perfect, Sarah, he muttered, his voice thick with bitterness. Always one step ahead. It's not about being perfect, Darren, I said, picking up the ticket. It felt strangely anticlimactic now, the thrill of the win overshadowed by the ugliness of this moment. It's about honesty, and you've proven tonight that you don't have much of that. He flinched, as if I'd physically struck him. He turned abruptly and headed for the door, his earlier swagger completely gone, replaced by a defeated slump of his shoulders. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look back. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving the rest of us in a stunned, uncomfortable silence. My mother let out a shaky breath. I don't know what to say. Emily rushed over and threw her arms around me. "You were amazing, Sarah. He's such a creep." I hugged her back, my own hand still a little shaky. "He's my cousin, Em. It's just disappointing." My father placed a hand on my shoulder. "You handle that well, Sarah. Very well indeed." Later that evening, after the initial shock had subsided and the reality of the situation had sunk in, I sat on the sofa with my parents and Emily. The winning ticket, now secured safely in a fireproof box, represented a tangible shift in our lives. But the emotional fallout from Darren's betrayal lingered. "What are we going to do now?" my mother asked, her voice still laced with worry. "Well," I said, a small smile finally gracing my lips as I looked at the ticket's numbers, a carefully chosen sequence that had brought me both immense joy and profound disappointment. "We're going to claim it, of course." The process of claiming the winnings was, as expected, straightforward, thanks to the signed ticket and my foresight with the photocopy. The sum was substantial, enough to change our lives significantly. My parents were ecstatic, their worries about retirement and future security melting away. Emily was already planning trips and a new car. But for me, the true victory wasn't the money itself. It was the reaffirmation of my own strength and resourcefulness. It was knowing that, even in the face of betrayal, I could stand my ground and protect what was rightfully mine. It was the quiet satisfaction of proving Darren wrong, not just about the ticket, but about my own perceived weaknesses. Darren, predictably, didn't contact me. He seemed to have disappeared from the family radar, a silent testament to his shame. I heard through the grapevine that he'd had a rather public meltdown at a local bar shortly after the incident, railing against his bad luck and perceived injustices. It was a lonely, self-inflicted exile. Weeks turned into months. The initial excitement of the winnings settled into a comfortable reality. We were able to do things we'd only dreamed of: a comfortable new home, a secure financial future, opportunities for travel and further education. But the memory of that evening, of Darren's triumphant, then devastated face, remained a potent reminder. It was a lesson learned, not just about the unpredictable nature of luck, but about the darker currents that could run beneath the surface of even the closest family ties. It taught me to trust my instincts, to be prepared, and most importantly, to never underestimate the power of a simple signature. The winning ticket had brought fortune, yes, but the true triumph was in reclaiming my own narrative, in ensuring that a moment of greed and deceit did not define my future. I had played the hand I was dealt, and with a little foresight and a lot of nerve I had won the game. The months following that chaotic evening had been a whirlwind of financial planning, dream fulfillment, and the quiet, almost surreal adjustment to a life unburdened by financial anxiety. The hum of pre-dinner preparations was still there, but now it was accompanied by the gentle clinking of wine glasses, the aroma of more adventurous culinary experiments, and the soft murmur of conversations about upcoming travel plans. My parents were finally able to relax, their faces etched with a profound sense of relief that was more rewarding to me than the lottery winnings themselves. Emily, true to her word, was halfway through a rigorous pilot training program, her laughter echoing from the flight simulator hangar more often than not. My own life had taken a pleasant, if less dramatic, turn. The financial security allowed me to pursue my passion projects with renewed vigor, without the constant pressure of deadlines and rent. I'd finally opened that small, independent bookstore I'd always dreamed of, a cozy haven filled with the scent of old paper and new stories, and a sanctuary for those seeking an escape from the mundane. It wasn't a flashy, high-octane life, but it was mine, built on my own efforts and now a significant windfall. Darren, however, remained a ghost. His dramatic exit from our lives had been absolute. No calls, no texts, no apologetic appearances at family gatherings. It was as if he'd been scrubbed from the family photo album. Initially, there was a knot of guilt in my stomach. a residual trace of that ingrained family loyalty. But as the weeks bled into months, that guilt began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet understanding. He had made his choice, and in doing so, had chosen a path that led away from us. The grapevine, a remarkably efficient conduit for family gossip, occasionally offered snippets of his life. A brief stint as a door-to-door salesman that ended abruptly, a rumored argument with a landlord, the usual litany of his escalating misfortunes. Each report, however, was tinged with a certain detachment. The Darren who had tried to steal our future was no longer the brother of my sister, the son of my aunt, or the cousin I had once shared childhood secrets with. He was a stranger, a cautionary tale. The silence from Darren was a constant, unspoken undercurrent to our new reality. It was a void where his opportunistic presence used to be, and while the absence was undeniably a relief, it also left a lingering question mark. What had become of him? Had he learned anything from his actions, or was he simply drifting, a ship lost at sea, forever chasing ill-gotten gains? One crisp autumn afternoon, a crispness that mirrored the sharp clarity I now felt, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number, but the area code was local. I answered, expecting a sales call or perhaps a telemarketing scam. "Hello?" I said, my voice a little softer than usual, a habit of politeness I'd never quite shed. "Sarah? Sarah Davies?" A man's voice, hesitant and rough around the edges, crackled through the line. It took me a moment to place it. It was Darren. His voice was raspy, laced with a weariness I hadn't heard before, a stark contrast to the triumphant, almost manic tone he'd possessed that fateful evening. My heart gave a little lurch, a mix of apprehension and a morbid curiosity. "Darren, is that you?" "Yeah, it's me. Look, Sarah, I know it's been a while." He cleared his throat, and I could almost visualize him chewing the inside of his cheek, the old nervous habit resurfacing. "I was wondering if maybe we could talk." The request hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. My initial instinct was to refuse, to maintain the carefully constructed peace of our new lives. But then I remembered his words. "You always had to be so perfect, Sarah. Always one step ahead." There was a bitterness in that accusation, a twisted resentment that spoke volumes about his own perceived shortcomings. Perhaps, I thought, a conversation, however uncomfortable, was necessary, for closure if nothing else. "Talk about what, Darren?" I asked, my voice neutral. There was a long pause. About everything. About that night. About what happened." His voice cracked slightly. "I've been doing some thinking, Sarah. A lot of thinking." I sighed. "All right, Darren. Where and when?" He suggested a quiet, out-of-the-way cafe on the outskirts of town, a place neither of us had any particular connection to, a neutral territory. I agreed, setting a time for the following Saturday. The days leading up to the meeting were filled with a low hum of anticipation. I found myself replaying the events of that night, not with the sharp pang of betrayal, but with a detached analysis. Darren's actions had been driven by a potent cocktail of desperation, envy, and a fundamental lack of integrity. It was a shame, a profound sadness, that he had allowed himself to be consumed by those negative forces. Saturday arrived, damp and overcast, a fitting backdrop for what I suspected would be a difficult conversation. I arrived at the cafe a few minutes early, choosing a table in a quiet corner, my eyes scanning the entrance for any sign of Darren. He finally appeared, looking older than I remembered, his thin frame seeming even more fragile. The swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous hunch in his shoulders. He wore the same worn-out jacket he'd sported that night, a faded testament to his continued financial struggles. He saw me and approached slowly, his eyes downcast. "Sarah," he mumbled, sinking into the chair opposite me. "Darren," I replied, offering a small, tentative smile. The waitress arrived, and we both ordered black coffee, a shared preference from our childhood. As she retreated, the silence descended again, heavier this time, charged with unspoken regret and a shared painful memory. "So," I began, breaking the quiet, You wanted to talk." He nodded, his fingers nervously twisting the handle of his coffee mug. "Yeah, I wanted to apologize." His voice was barely above a whisper. "For what I did. For trying to steal your ticket. It was a low blow, Sarah. Even for me." He looked up then, his eyes meeting mine, and for the first time I saw genuine remorse in them, not the self-pitying resentment that had characterized him before. I was so desperate, Sarah, so lost. And you always seemed to have it all figured out. The good job, the supportive parents, and then that ticket. It just felt like the universe was handing you another win, and I was still stuck at the bottom. His confession, raw and unvarnished, landed with a surprising weight. It didn't excuse his actions, but it offered a glimpse into the twisted logic that had driven him. "Darren," I said, choosing my words carefully, "I understand desperation. I've faced my own share of challenges. But that doesn't give anyone the right to take from others, especially from family." "I know," he said, his gaze falling back to his coffee, "and I know I messed up. Badly. I've thought about it every day since. About how stupid I was to think I could get away with it, and how much I ruined things." A flicker of that old bitterness surfaced. "You know, Sarah," he continued, his voice regaining a touch of its former rasp, "even with the ticket, even with the money, it didn't fix anything. It just made things worse in a different way. It made me realize how much of a mess I really am." He took a long sip of his coffee, his hands trembling slightly. I've been working odd jobs, anything I can get. Delivering flyers, cleaning offices. It's not much, but it's honest, I guess." He managed a weak, self-deprecating smile. "Honest work. Who would have thought?" "It's a start, Darren," I said, my voice softening, "and it's good that you're trying." He looked at me again, a flicker of something akin to hope in his eyes. "Sarah, I didn't come here asking for anything. I wanted you to know that I'm not that person anymore. Or at least, I'm trying not to be." He hesitated. "My mom, she's not doing too well. The medical bills are piling up. I was wondering if maybe you and your parents, if you could lend us some money? Just until I get back on my feet. I promise, I'll pay it back. Every penny." The request, though expected, still stung. It was a stark reminder of his ingrained opportunism, the deep-seated habit of relying on others. I felt a familiar surge of anger, the protective instinct for my own family kicking in. But then, I looked at him, truly looked at him. The gauntness of his face, the hollowness in his eyes, the sheer desperation etched into every line. He was still my cousin, for better or worse. "Darren," I began, my voice firm but not unkind. "We've helped you before, and as you said, you took advantage of that. My parents and I worked hard for this money. It's not a bottomless well." His face fell, and I saw the familiar flicker of disappointment, the prelude to resentment. "However," I continued, and he looked up, a spark of surprise in his eyes, "I'm willing to help you, but not in the way you're asking. I won't just hand you money. It hasn't worked in the past, and it won't work now. Instead, I'm offering you a job. My bookstore is growing, and I could use some extra help with inventory, deliveries, customer service. It's honest work, like you said, and it pays a fair wage. If you're serious about getting back on your feet, Darren, this is your chance, a real chance to earn it." I watched his reaction intently. The struggle was visible on his face, the ingrained desire for an easy handout warring with the faint, newly awakened flicker of pride. He chewed his cheek vigorously. Finally, he let out a shaky breath. "A job?" he repeated, as if the concept was foreign. "Yes, a job," I confirmed. "It's not glamorous, and it's not a quick fix, but it's a way forward. You can earn your way." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the swirling patterns in his coffee. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. "Okay, Sarah," he said, his voice raspy but steady. "Okay, I'll take it." The relief that washed over me was immense. It wasn't just about offering him an opportunity. It was about reclaiming a piece of my family. about the possibility of healing, however slow and painstaking. The first few weeks of Darren working at the bookstore were tense. He was quiet, almost unnervingly so, flinching at loud noises and meticulously following instructions. He arrived on time, worked diligently, and rarely spoke unless spoken to. The old habits of procrastination and entitlement seemed to have been replaced by a newfound conscientiousness, a quiet determination to prove himself. I observed him closely, offering quiet guidance and encouragement. He was surprisingly good with the customers, his former nervousness evolving into a gentle attentiveness. He had a knack for remembering people's preferences and a genuine warmth that began to shine through his reserved demeanor. He even started recommending books, his reading habits, long dormant, slowly reawakening. One afternoon, while I was sorting through a new shipment of books, Darren approached me, holding a slightly worn copy of a classic novel. "Sarah," he said, his voice clear and confident, "I was wondering if you'd seen this book before. It's really good. I was thinking, maybe we could feature it next month." It was a small moment, perhaps insignificant to anyone else, but for me, it was monumental. It was Darren, the cousin I had almost written off, engaging with the world in a positive, constructive way. It was him contributing to a shared endeavor, not with opportunistic greed, but with genuine enthusiasm. My parents, initially hesitant about my decision to offer Darren employment, began to thaw as they heard about his progress. My mother would call me daily, her voice filled with a cautious optimism. "He's a hard worker, isn't he?" she'd say. "He's really trying, Sarah. I'm proud of you." The incident with the lottery ticket had been a watershed moment, a brutal awakening to the darker aspects of human nature, even within the closest of bonds. But it had also illuminated the strength and resilience I possessed. It had taught me that true wealth wasn't just financial, but also about integrity, about self-respect, and about the courage to rebuild, even when faced with the wreckage of betrayal. Darren's journey was far from over. He still had a long way to go, many personal demons to conquer, but for the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of genuine hope for him. He was no longer defined by his past mistakes, but by his present efforts. He was earning his place, not by chance or by deceit, but by honest work and a renewed sense of purpose. The silence that had once suffocated our kitchen had been replaced by the comfortable rhythm of everyday life. The chatter of family members was back, but it was now tinged with a newfound appreciation for each other, for the shared resilience that had seen us through the darkness. And in the quiet corners of my bookstore, amongst the stacks of stories waiting to be discovered, I knew that the greatest story of all was the one we were still writing, together. The lottery ticket, a symbol of both greed and fortune, had ultimately been a catalyst for something more profound, the slow, arduous, but ultimately rewarding process of redemption, not just for Darren, but for the fractured bonds of our family. The signature on that ticket, once a shield, had become a testament to the power of standing firm and the unexpected rewards that come from choosing empathy and offering a second chance, even when it feels impossibly difficult. The initial weeks with Darren at the bookstore were a carefully orchestrated dance of cautious hope and lingering apprehension. Every late arrival, every misplaced shipment, every hesitant interaction with a customer sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. My parents, too, remained on edge, their usual warmth towards me now laced with a subtle, unspoken questioning. Had I been too naive? Had I opened the door to further disappointment? Darren himself seemed to operate under a cloak of perpetual vigilance. He was a shadow in the periphery, meticulously alphabetizing spines, wiping down counters with an almost obsessive thoroughness, and ensuring the till was balanced to the last penny. His conversations were minimal, clipped, and always subservient. When a customer asked for a recommendation, he'd defer to me with a nervous glance. If a delivery truck arrived, he'd shrink back as if expecting a reprimand. It was clear he was still deeply entrenched in the habit of expecting the worst, of bracing himself for the inevitable fall. This reticence, however, began to subtly shift. It started with small things. He'd begin to offer tentative suggestions about book placement, pointing out how a particular display might attract more attention. He'd notice when a section was looking a bit bare and quietly restock it without being asked. Then came the recommendations. Hesitant at first, just a quiet, "This one's quite popular," or "A few people have enjoyed this." But gradually his confidence grew. He discovered a surprising aptitude for understanding what customers were looking for, his own rekindled love for reading blossoming into an intuitive sense of literary connection. One rainy Tuesday, a week into his employment, a regular customer, Mrs. Gable, a sprightly elderly woman with a penchant for historical fiction, was browsing. She'd been searching for a specific title for weeks, a rare biography of a lesser-known suffragette. I'd scoured my usual suppliers with no luck. Darren, who had been quietly shelving nearby, overheard our exchange. "Excuse me," he said, his voice still a little hesitant, but with a newfound clarity. Mrs. Gable turned, a polite smile on her face. "I think I might have seen that at a used bookstore on Elm Street last week. They have a pretty good selection of out-of-print books." Mrs. Gable's eyes lit up. "Oh, really? That's wonderful." "I hadn't thought of there." "I can give you the address if you like," Darren offered, pulling out a notepad and pen. As he wrote, I watched him, a flicker of surprise, then something akin to pride, warming my chest. He wasn't just taking instructions. He was actively contributing, using his own initiative. Later that day, Mrs. Gable returned, her face beaming, the biography clutched triumphantly in her hand. "He was right, dear," she exclaimed, turning to Darren. "They had it. And in excellent condition, too. Thank you so much, young man. You've saved me a great deal of frustration." Darren flushed, a faint pink spreading across his cheeks, but he met her gaze with a genuine smile. "Glad I could help, Mrs. Gable." That was the turning point. Small victories, repeated over the ensuing weeks, began to chip away at the wall of guilt and distrust that had surrounded Darren. He was consistently on time, he was reliable, and he was, surprisingly, good at the job. He discovered a hidden talent for organization, transforming a perpetually chaotic back room into a model of efficiency. He even started engaging in conversations with customers, his former awkwardness replaced by a quiet charm. My parents, observing this transformation from afar, began to relax. My mother's phone calls became less about worry and more about casual updates. "Did Darren help Mrs. Henderson find that gardening book she was looking for?" she'd ask, her tone lighter. My father, a man of few words, offered his approval with a simple, "He's working hard." The financial strain on my parents had been significant, and the lottery win had been a blessing they hadn't dared to hope for. It had been their ticket to a retirement, free from the gnawing fear of unexpected medical bills or dwindling savings. The thought of them having to bail Darren out again, to absorb the consequences of his past recklessness, had been a heavy burden. Now, seeing him earn his own way, seeing him regain a sliver of his dignity, eased that burden considerably. Emily, too, was thriving. Her pilot training was demanding, pushing her to her limits, but the exhilaration in her voice when she recounted her simulated landings or the intricate principles of aerodynamics was palpable. She visited less frequently, her schedule packed with lectures and practical sessions, but when she did, her laughter seemed louder, her presence more vibrant. She'd often stop by the bookstore, a whirlwind of energy, grabbing a coffee and sharing snippets of her adventures before rushing off to her next commitment. My own life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The bookstore, my sanctuary, was a constant source of quiet joy. The scent of old paper, the murmur of contented readers, the satisfaction of matching the right book to the right person. It was a fulfillment far more profound than any financial gain. I found myself able to dedicate time to my other passions, painting, writing, even dabbling in local community gardening projects. The constant hum of financial anxiety that had once been a soundtrack to my life had faded, replaced by a gentle, contented melody. The silence from Darren's end, however, persisted for a while. Even after he started working at the bookstore, he remained reticent about his life outside of it. He'd offer only vague answers about his mother's health or his living situation. I respected his privacy, but a small part of me still wondered if he was genuinely turning over a new leaf, or if this was just another phase, another calculated maneuver. Then, one crisp autumn evening, a few months after he'd started, Darren lingered after closing. The bookstore was bathed in the warm glow of the streetlights, the day's transactions completed. He was stacking the last of the return books, his movements efficient and practiced. "Sarah?" he said, his voice soft, as he approached my desk. I was reviewing sales figures, a contented sigh escaping my lips. "Yes, Darren," I replied, looking up. He held out a small, slightly crumpled envelope. This is the first installment, for the money I owe you, from that night." I stared at the envelope, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't a large sum, maybe $50, but the significance of it was immense. It was a tangible acknowledgement of his debt, a gesture of accountability that had been absent for so long. "Darren," I started, unsure of what to say. He met my gaze, and this time, there was no trace of the old resentment or self-pity. There was a quiet strength, a steady resolve. "I know it's not much," he said, his voice firm, "but it's a start, and I'm going to keep paying you back, every penny. And for the money I borrowed from my mom before all that happened." He paused, his shoulders straightening slightly. "She's doing better, by the way. The treatments are helping. And I've been helping her with the bills. We're making it work." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. It was more than just the repayment. It was the honesty, the effort, the reclaiming of his own agency. "Thank you, Darren," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot." He gave a small, genuine smile. "It means more to me, Sarah." Over the next year, Darren continued to work at the bookstore. He became an integral part of its fabric, a quiet, reliable presence. He was no longer just an employee. He was a trusted colleague, a friend even. He developed a passion for curating the local history section, unearthing forgotten authors, and obscure regional narratives. He even started a small book club, focusing on classic literature, attracting a dedicated following. He never asked for handouts again. Instead, he saved diligently, working extra shifts when possible. He saved enough to move into a modest apartment of his own, and eventually he began to help his mother with her ongoing medical expenses, not with borrowed money or stolen fortunes, but with his own hard-earned wages. My relationship with Darren evolved from one of cautious hope to one of genuine respect and affection. We still had our moments of awkwardness, remnants of the past that couldn't be entirely erased. But there was also a newfound ease, a comfortable camaraderie built on shared experience and mutual understanding. We could talk about books, about life, about our families, without the heavy weight of unspoken accusations. One evening, as we were closing up, Darren was rearranging a display of travel guides. He paused, a wistful look on his face. "You know," he said, turning to me, "seeing all these places, it makes me want to see them too. Maybe one day." I smiled. "There's no reason why not, Darren. You're earning your own way. The world is a big place." He nodded, a flicker of that old spark in his eyes, but this time it was a spark of genuine aspiration, not of reckless ambition. He was still a work in progress, a man actively engaged in the process of self-recreation. But he was on the right path. My parents, watching our relationship mend and strengthen, often spoke of the lottery win with a quiet gratitude that went beyond the financial. They saw it not just as a stroke of luck, but as an opportunity that had forced a reckoning, a chance to confront difficult truths and emerge stronger. My father, in a rare moment of sentimentality, even admitted, "That ticket, it did more than just give us money, Sarah. It helped us remember what's truly important." Emily, now a fully licensed pilot, was soaring, quite literally. She'd landed her dream job with a regional airline and spoke with infectious enthusiasm about the freedom of the skies. She remained my anchor, my confidant, a reminder of the unwavering support that had always been there, even in the darkest of times. The chaotic evening that had once seemed like a harbinger of ruin had, in a strange and unexpected way, paved the way for a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. The financial security had been the catalyst, but the real transformation had come from within. It had come from confronting the darkness, From choosing forgiveness and second chances, from rebuilding trust and embracing the slow, steady work of healing. The hum of pre-dinner preparations was still a familiar comfort in my parents' home, but now it was accompanied by something more substantial. The quiet murmur of shared resilience, the clinking of glasses raised in quiet celebration of a future hard won, and the enduring understanding that true wealth lay not in the digits on a lottery ticket, but in the strength of our connections, the integrity of our choices, and the unwavering belief in the possibility of redemption. Darren's journey, though still unfolding, was a testament to that belief, a quiet triumph that resonated far beyond the walls of my little bookstore, a reminder that even from the ashes of betrayal, something beautiful and enduring could still bloom. The signature on that ticket, once a symbol of a desperate act, had become, for me, a quiet testament to the power of choice and the extraordinary strength found in offering a hand up, rather than turning a blind eye.